Day 33. For nearly a month, it felt like absolutely nothing was happening. You know the feeling, right? Every single day looked exactly the same. Create, upload, wait. Then, one night, something changed. He opened his analytics and just stared at the screen. The numbers were small, sure, but they were actually moving. More views, more watch time, real people discovering his content. And the crazy thing is, most people quit right before this exact moment. Because progress? It's completely invisible in the beginning. You work your heart out for weeks and get almost nothing back. But success doesn't arrive all at once. It starts with these tiny little signs that most people totally ignore. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to deconstruct how to survive this grueling middle phase of literally any massive endeavor.
That night, staring at those small numbers, he realized he wasn't just chasing fleeting motivation anymore. He was building real momentum. Before going to sleep, he scribbled something down in his notebook. Growth becomes visible only after consistency becomes painful. And honestly, that perfectly captures the brutal psychological reality of what experts call the trough of sorrow. It's that period where you're putting in the work for weeks, maybe even months, and getting zero reward.
And we can see the massive stakes of sticking it out through this trough in some pretty extreme real-world experiments. Take Mr. Beast's 100-day isolation challenge, for example. Two complete strangers, Bailey and Susie, were locked inside a featureless white room. The prize? A massive $500,000 waiting for them at the finish line. But to actually get it, they had to survive a psychological grind where time itself basically just seemed to stop.
Okay, Section 1, the invisible grind, surviving the trough of sorrow.
If you chart out an experience like this, the psychological decay is actually pretty wild. You start out on day 1 just fueled by pure, unadulterated excitement. You're ready to go. But by the time you hit roughly a month in, right around that day 33 mark, you hit this unbearable breaking point. That initial adrenaline is totally gone, and the finish line, it still feels impossibly far away. Inside that isolation challenge, Bailey and Susie faced a mind-numbing routine that perfectly illustrates this grind. Imagine blinding white lights that literally sting your eyes, eating the exact same canned chicken every single day. By day 4, they were so desperately bored they actually ripped up journal paper just to craft a makeshift deck of playing cards. They were putting in the time, but feeling absolutely zero reward.
So the huge question is, why do most people just quit here? Well, the crucial thing to understand is the sheer existential dread that hits when you're doing the work but getting zero feedback. Human beings are literally wired for progress. When you're just staring at a blank white wall or, a zero-view dashboard for weeks on end, your own brain actively tries to convince you to just give up.
And we see this identically in the digital space too. Creator Ryan Trahan hit this exact same wall around day 36 of his 100-day metaverse isolation. He was putting in insane hours trying to build a presence in virtual reality, but the loneliness was intense. He had zero online friends, felt this deep, heavy regret over his life decisions, and even admitted to crying himself to sleep. The silence was just deafening.
Now, zooming out to the financial world, entrepreneur Mark Tilbury warns that escaping what he calls the traditional route, that 9-to-5 trading time for a fixed paycheck life, requires enduring this exact type of brutal, invisible phase. The new route to real wealth means sitting alone, developing high-income skills, and facing failure with absolutely no initial paycheck. That painful early consistency, that's the toll you have to pay for massive, scalable freedom later on.
Which brings us to Section 2. The first signs when the small numbers start moving. Right when the pain of consistency peaks, something magical happens. The tiny milestones start showing up. For Ryan Trahan, it was making just one single normal friend named Clay. For a freelancer, it's landing that very first tiny video editing client. For Bailey and Susie in that isolation chamber, it was pooling 10 grand of their prize money to finally buy a coffee maker and some spices. Suddenly, their unbearable environment became livable. These tiny sparks prove the journey is actually real.
Tilbury breaks this down into a really clear formula. First, you consume knowledge, but then you have to brutally apply your new skills even when you completely suck at them. You have to push those simple, messy projects out into the world to get those first tiny signs of feedback. Over time, that's what eventually allows you to reach step 3, educating others and generating recurring revenue. And there's a great quote from Mark Zuckerberg highlighted in Tilbury's breakdown. The greatest successes come from having the freedom to fail. Giving yourself permission to fail in the beginning is quite literally the only way to build forward momentum. If you demand absolute perfection on day 1, I promise you're never going to survive to see day 33.
Moving right along to Section 3. Building real momentum. The The danger of success.
Okay, but here's the twist. Success doesn't magically solve everything. In fact, as momentum builds, it introduces a completely new set of psychological traps. Once you actually have something to lose, whether that's a growing audience, a new business, or hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in a cube, the stakes skyrocket. Momentum can breed serious paranoia, intense exhaustion, and this terrifying fear of losing it all.
Look at the brilliant contrast in the Mr. Beast challenge. On day 1, Bailey and Susie were just polite strangers, super happy to meet. By day 99, they were barely surviving each other. They went from polite roommates to completely paranoid. Bailey was aggressively pacing the room at 3 a.m., and Susie was literally hiding the Monopoly dice just so she wouldn't have to interact with him. Success and constant proximity were driving them absolutely crazy.
Tulbury illustrates this danger perfectly in the business world too. Let's say you push through the high learning curve and build an expert, high-income skill. Great. But if you get stuck endlessly trading your hours for cash, you hit a wall of diminishing returns. You might have high income, but you experience a total loss of freedom. You basically trap yourself in a prison of your own making, pacing around just like Bailey in that white room.
Let's move to our final stage, Section 4, Surviving the Finish Line, the ultimate test of consistency.
After 100 agonizing days of sheer psychological warfare, Jimmy presented Susie and Bailey with a devastating final choice. The classic dilemma, split or steal. They could split the remaining money, or they could hit steal. If one stalled, they'd take it all. But if they both chose to steal, they would walk away with absolutely nothing. All that suffering, 100 days of their lives, potentially for $0.
But here's the beautiful part. Despite the intense paranoia, the annoyances, the emotional exhaustion, they both chose to split. They walked away with around $360,000 each. It really proved that if you can endure the pain, keep communicating, and hold on to your humanity through that invisible grind, it genuinely leads to massive, life-changing rewards. To truly cross the finish line in your own life and avoid that trap of just trading time for money, you must transition. You have to scale your high-income skill, build an automated system, and ultimately create something, like an education business, that generates predictable, recurring revenue. That is how you finally, permanently buy your freedom back.
Hitting that ultimate $10,000 a month goal, or, surviving 100 days in total isolation, it's not about chasing some fleeting burst of motivation. It is entirely about pushing through the utterly invisible progress of those early days until your momentum finally pays off in a massive way.
So I want to leave you with this final thought today. When you inevitably hit your own day 33, when your eyes sting, you're exhausted, and the numbers are barely moving, how are you going to handle the silence? Are you going to pack it in and quit? Or will you accept that the pain is actually just the very first sign of real growth?